So once again, welcome everyone. Good evening. Today we are going to start a new book, which is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And some of you have been very regular and would know that we started with Secret on the 3rd of January, the book by Rhonda Byrnes. And we wanted to make sure that we started our year in a good note, understanding the concept of the secret, taking us forward in our lives. And today we are talking about a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Um, I'm going to ask you the question once again because we had a couple of people who joined in. If any one of you has read the book, The Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, or if you've read any other book by this interesting author, I would love to see you either raise your hands or raise your virtual hands, or why don't you type READ, R-E-A-D, in the chat, and it would tell me how many of our guests today, how many of you friends have read this book. So I know Manika has read the book, and I'm very, very jealous to hear that Manika also met Robert Kiyosaki when he was here in India. I shall go into my meditation and manifestation to try and meet the gentleman because I have read a couple of his other books, and it's very inspiring to hear him, to read his thoughts. And this is a book that has inspired not just me, but a lot of friends that I know. And as I was mentioning, there were a couple of people who said, "Oh, Kamlesh, you also read the book, and I hope you enjoyed it." And while we are going to be talking about the book, I would also like to hear your thoughts. But as I was sharing, when I shared the message with my friends, a couple of them said this book is for investors. And I was wondering, why would it be only for investors? Because when you read even the introduction of the book by Sharon Lecter, she talks about her experience when she was talking to her younger son who wanted to drop out of college. And he said, "What is the point of studying?" And that, in a way, resonates with me because if you have seen a lot of uh, our friends, a lot of well-known businessmen, millionaires, billionaires, are not necessarily from the Yales and the Harvards. They are school dropouts. So they're doing something different as opposed to some of us who go to college, hope to get a good job, hope that they stay in the right job, and they're aspiring to make more money. So going into the book, I'm just reading, about Robert Kiyosaki, who has taught people to be millionaires. And when we actually read the book, when we read about Robert Kiyosaki, you will also realize that a lot of people who yes, become investors, who yes, go into network marketing, who also choose to create a path of their own are by the book, not just Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but a few other books by Robert Kiyosaki. I'm going to start with the introduction because I was quite intrigued by what Sharon Lecter says. That she says, she asks a question. She leads the introduction with a question saying, "Does school prepare children for the real world?" And I was just seeing one of our participants today is 12 years old. And I'm not sure if his parents are going to be happy when I ask this question, but does school really prepare children for a real world? Study hard, good grades is what will get you a high paying job, is what most parents tell us. But is that reality? If we look around us, if we look into our own lives, is that what really happens? And going into the first chapter, Robert starts very, very interestingly. He says, "I had two fathers, a rich one and a poor one. One was a highly educated and intelligent man who had a PhD. He completed 4 years of undergrad and he went to look at the schools he went to. He went to Stanford. He went to the Northern University. He was a professor. He studied on full financial scholarships. And the other dad, who was the rich dad, did not even finish his 8th grade. But what did his biological father, who was the poor father, or the poor dad, as he calls, he lived his life as a professor. He lived his life teaching people, but he also lived his life living from paycheck to paycheck and was absolutely desperate, in debt at many times. And then who is this? Who is the rich dad? It is the father of his friend, a father of his friend called Michael, who eventually also became a father figure for him. And he was someone who said, rich people make money work for me. So how many of you like the concept of money working for you? I want you to type money into the chat box. I would love to see how many of you would like money to work for you. I love that. In fact, I have my cousin here who's also listening to me. He also raises his hand and says, I want money to work for me. I want money to work for me. And, at the age of 40 or 45 or 50, when you turn around, you want to make sure that money is working for you, as opposed to being used to a drug called salary. We go to work, we work for 8 hours, 12 hours, 15 hours, and what do? You go to work, you come back, you go to work, you come back, you go to work, you come back. And I have a friend who says that's all that she and her husband have done all their life. Go to work, come back, go to work, come back, go to work, come back. And today, after having read this book, in fact, she was the one who inspired me to start reading this book. She says, my husband is going to be doing that. And what I'm going to be doing is to start a business, to start investing, to have a second source of income and make money work for me. So we realize that money is not taught in schools. Schools focus on scholastic and professional skills, but not on financial skills. And that is why you will see bankers, doctors, accountants who had wonderful grades in school, but are financially struggling all their lives. And come to think about it, our staggering national debt is due mainly to, if you look at it, the highly educated politicians and government officials who make financial decisions with little or no training on the subject of money. Money should be taught in schools, but is it? No. And he says that both my dads worked very hard, but I noticed that one dad had a habit of putting his brain to sleep when it came to money matters, and the other who had a habit of exercising his brain. And the long-term result of that was one dad grew to be stronger financially, while the other kept getting weaker and weaker. And it is not much different from a person who goes to the gym to exercise on a regular basis, right? When you go and practice in the gym, when you're using different muscles, you build your muscle. When you start investing, when you start using the muscle of making money and making sure that money works for you, that is a muscle that you build over time. But unfortunately, we are not taught that in school. We learn this in life. If we are lucky, like Robert, you have someone in your life who teaches this to you. If you are lucky, you have friends who teach it to you. There are very, very few of us who realize this on our own. So he says that my dads had opposing attitudes in thought. One dad thought that the rich should pay more taxes to take care of the less fortunate. And the other one said taxes punish those who produce and reward those who do not produce. One father would recommend that the reason I am not rich is because I have you kids to take care of, I have my wife to take care of, I have a house for which I'm paying the rent. Whereas the other person says the reason I must be rich is because I have you children to take care of. I want to become rich and I want to make sure that money works for me. And both the dads paid their bills on time, but one paid his bills first while the other paid his bills last. So one dad believed in a company or the government taking care of your personal needs. He was concerned about pay rises, retirement plans, medical benefits, sick leave, vacation days, whereas the other was sure that he knew how to make money and he would make sure that he made enough money for himself, for his family, and made sure that he used his money to make money for himself. And Robert was lucky that he had these two people who entered his life at the age of 9, which is a very impressionable age. I'm in fact surprised that someone like Robert realized at the age of 9 that his father, who was such a learned and an educated man, was giving him advice which did not make sense. And therefore, he wanted to try a few businesses. And he did try a few businesses, but he was also aware that after working for hours after school, he was making 10 cents an hour or 20 cents an hour, which even in 1956 was not a lot of money. And then he met his friend Michael's father, who said, I will teach you how to make money, but I will also teach you things that are not taught in school. I will make sure that you understand by doing. It's an experiential learning. And he says, being a product of two strong dads allowed me the luxury of observing the effects different thoughts have on one's life. I noticed that people really do shape their life through their thoughts. And that's such a wonderful thought, right? Because our thoughts are important. Our thoughts are what create our action, and our actions decide our destiny. And if we have the right thoughts, if we have the right positive thoughts where we take action, that's where we will have the positive action in our life. So if you believe that your thoughts decide your life and your thoughts are going to guide your life, I want you to type thoughts in the chat box. I also want to make sure that we have people who are awake amongst us. Thanks, Imran. I agree that thoughts really are, yes, my thoughts, my destiny. I love that, Simran. And then he goes on to say that the power of our thoughts may never be measured or appreciated, but it became obvious to me as a young boy to be aware of my thoughts and how I expressed myself. I noticed that my poor dad was poor not because of the amount of money he earned, which was a significant amount, but because of his thoughts and actions. As a young boy, having two fathers, I became acutely aware of being careful which thoughts I chose to adopt as my own. And although both men had tremendous respect, bear with me for a second, I'm admitting some people in. We have a sizable audience. For those of you who are just joining us, we are talking about the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And here we are talking about how our thoughts are important. And he goes on to say that the power of our thoughts may never be measured or appreciated, but it became obvious to Robert as a young boy that he needed to be aware of his thoughts and how he expressed himself. And he also goes ahead to say that although both men had tremendous respect for education and learning, they disagreed in what thought they thought was important to learn. One wanted Robert to study hard, earn a degree, get a job, and work for money, which is, I think, 90 to 95% of us. He wanted Robert to become a professional, an attorney, or an accountant to go into business, maybe get himself an MBA. Whereas his other father, who he calls his rich dad, which is the father of his friend Michael, encouraged him to study, to be rich, to understand how money works, and to learn how to have it for himself. I don't work for money, were the words he would repeat over and over. Money works for me. So let's take a moment and remind ourselves that we need to make sure that money works for us. And let's get into the habit of having a side hustle, having a moonlighting, I won't call it a job, but a moonlighting effort, something on the side where we start making sure that our money is going to make more money for you, right? And then he ends the first chapter saying, at the age of 9, I decided to listen to and learn from my rich dad about money. And he obviously has, right? Because today, not only is he an author, but he is a business coach. He is a man who has helped millions of people to, he's taught them how to be millionaires. And it's about your actions, it's about your thoughts, and it's about the steps that you take. And he says, in doing so, I chose not to listen to my poor dad, even though he was one of the person with many college degrees. And I love the poem. He's shared a poem by Robert Frost. I won't read the whole poem, but the poem is called The Road Not Taken. The poem starts with two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler long I stood and looked down as far as I could to where it went in the undergrowth. It's a poem about a man standing at the crossroads, trying to figure out which road to take. Do I take the road of study hard, go to college, get into good universities, find myself a good job, and then try and stay with the same job, wait for my salary at the end of the month, and hope to be rich one day? Or do I take the road of being an entrepreneur, being a hustler, being brave enough to know that beyond the study, beyond the job, there is a world where you can make money, but you can also make sure that you have not just one venture. You start a venture, you make some money, you either invest in that venture or invest in another venture, but you have active and passive incomes which take care of you. And that was the crossroad where he decided that he wanted to go down the second road, because he learned that the rich don't work for money, money works for them. So when he goes into chapter 2, he starts with a question that he asked his father: Dad, can you tell me how to get rich? And his dad put down the evening paper and he says, why do you want to get rich? He said, because today Jimmy's mom drove up in their new Cadillac and they were going to the beach house. He took 3 of his friends, but Mike and I were not invited because we are not rich. We are poor. And this was the pivotal point where he realized that he wanted to make money and become rich. And then he tried a couple of hustles. So the first one he tried was where he went all around his neighborhood. In those, he's talking about 1950s, the late 50s, early 60s, where toothpaste came in silver tubes, and they tried to melt that and make some coins. Now, a 9-year-old, of course, did not know that you cannot make coins. It's illegal. And then they tried another hustle where he worked for Michael's father, where he was getting 10 cents. And even by 1956 standards, 10 cents was not a good amount of money. But Michael's father wanted him to work and realize that just working for 10 cents an hour or 20 cents an hour is not going to get him anywhere. And that was the beginning of his journey, where he started to realize that working for someone is never going to help. So he worked for a little while, and then he realized that he wasn't getting enough. And then he had the courage as a 9-10-year-old to go and talk to his friend's father and say, you're not paying me enough. I'm not going to work anymore. I'm going to quit. And that's when his friend's father said, I'm glad you said that, because I wanted you to realize that working for 10 cents an hour is going to get you nowhere, right? So when he went to meet his friend's father, he was made to wait outside, and he was getting really upset and angry, but he wanted some answers. But it was a lesson for him that if you're going to be working for someone, this is your life for the rest of your life. You're waiting for someone to meet you. You're waiting for your boss to give you time. You're waiting for your boss to give you a raise. And that's where his journey started. And then when he went to talk to his friend's father, he said that so the friend's father said, stop blaming me and thinking that I am the problem. If you think I'm the problem, then you have to change me. And if you think you're the problem, then you have to learn to change yourself. You can learn and make something of yourself and grow wiser. And at that point, when he said, I want to quit, his friend's father said, my friend, the poor and the middle class work for money. The rich have money work for them. And on that bright Saturday morning, when he went to meet what he then later on calls his rich dad, he was learning a completely different point of view from what he had been taught by his poor dad. At the age of 9, he grew aware that both dads wanted him to learn. Both dads encouraged him to study, but they weren't teaching him the same things. If you've met interesting people like this, type interesting in the chat box. I would love to see how many of you have been lucky enough or have been looking for people who gave you a different point of view. Please type interesting in your chat box. Great. Thanks, Kamlesh. Thanks, Simran. And then he goes ahead to say, if salary is all that we get, right? And if people realize that they will only get their salary after working for hours in a day, don't you think that you should also pay them more? And the rich dad says, I don't have to. Besides, more money will not solve the problem of people who only believe that they need to go to work and come back and do not take the risk. He said, just look at your father. He makes a lot of money, but he still can't pay the bills. Most people, given more money, will only go into more debt. So he says, you see, your dad went to school and got an excellent education, so he could get a high paying job, which he did, but he still has money problems because he never learned anything about money at school. And on top of that, he believes in working for money. He has bills to pay. The moment we start, let's take a real life example in our lives. The moment we make a little bit of money, we think we should buy a house because we think a house is an asset. How many of you believe that a house is an asset? Please type asset, A-S-S-E-T. How many of you feel that buying a house is an asset? Interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. Do you know something, that a house we believe is an asset? A house is an asset when you've paid all the money for it. But until then, it's a liability. And not many of us, I would think not more than 5% people in the, in our circle would be people who will be able to pick up the money, pay the entire house and say it's mine. Because you take a loan for a house, you have to pay an EMI every month. If you are late in paying the EMI, you are then forced to take another loan, or you have to pay an interest on the EMI. So our house, exactly, thanks Kamlesh, it's a liability till we pay all our EMIs. We have been taught to believe that a house or a car or anything that we buy on an EMI is an asset. It's not an asset till you pay it. A lot of people, a lot of my colleagues and friends from the US go and get themselves education in well-known universities. Even that education degree is not an asset because they spend decades paying the EMI and paying back the banks for the loan that they have taken. That education itself is not an asset. Thanks, Simran. Anything that we pay on an EMI is a liability. Let's remember that. Let's use that money and invest it to make more money for ourselves. Start a business, invest in whatever that you want to, but certainly not in a house. And this is something that I had not realized till I started reading books like these. Anyway, moving along. He says, so why wouldn't everyone want to learn that buying a house is not an asset but a liability? He said, the rich dad says no, simply because it's easier to learn to work for money, especially if fear is your primary emotion, because people believe that if I lose my job, I at least have a house. But you don't have the house till you've paid your EMIs. So then Robert, as a 9-year-old, said, learning to work for money is a completely different course of study. And the rich dad said, absolutely, absolutely. This is not what you will learn in school. And Robert goes on to say, we sat in silence on that beautiful Hawaiian Saturday morning. My friends would have been just starting their little league baseball game, but for some reason, I was now thankful that I had decided to work for 10 cents an hour. And I sensed that I was about to learn something that my friends would not be learning in school. Moving on, the rich dad said, let's get back to work. And this time I'm going to pay you nothing. So he was first earning 10 cents, which he thought was not enough. And then when the rich dad said, okay, now get back to work and I'm not going to pay you anything, he asked in amazement, what? And the rich dad says, you heard me, nothing. You will work the same 3 hours, but this time you will not be paid anything. So he said, okay, if you're complaining that there is not enough pay, you can quit and go looking for another job, because that's what people who have a job do. We know so many friends around us, and some of us in our lives also may have been asked to leave or have lost a job. And what did we do? Then we went looking for another job. And that's what the rich dad wanted to teach him. He says, okay, now let's get back to work. And the first lesson he said is the rich don't work for money. So therefore, he couldn't tell his father now that, Dad, I'm working for Michael's father, but I'm not getting paid. He would not have understood, and he did not want to try and explain because he himself was learning. So for 3 weeks, Mike, his friend, and he worked for 3 hours every Saturday for nothing. The work didn't bother him, but the routine got easier. And it was the missed baseball games and not being able to buy a few comics. That is what stopped him, and that's what bothered him. So the rich dad stopped by at noon on the third week, and we heard this truck pull up in the parking lot. When the engine was turned off, he entered the store and greeted one of the ladies with a hug. And finding out how things were going, he reached into the ice cream freezer, pulled out 2 bars, paid for them, and signaled to Mike and me. Let's go for a walk, boys, he said. They crossed the street, dodging a few cars, walked along a grassy field where a few adults were playing softball. How's it going? Okay, said Mike. Well, he also nodded. And then the rich dad said, learn anything? Mike and he shrugged their shoulders and tried to figure out, what did I learn? 3 weeks of no pay. And that's when he said, you boys better start thinking. You are staring at one of life's biggest lessons. If you learn the lessons, you will enjoy the life of great freedom and security. If you don't learn the lesson, you will end up like all the other ladies who are working and all these young men over here who are playing softball. They work hard for very little money, clinging to the illusion that their job gives them security. And then Robert says, but these are hardworking people. What's wrong with that? And that's when the rich dad smiled. He says, yes, Mrs. Martin, who works over here, is like a mother to me. I would never be cruel and I would never call her names. I'm doing my best to point something out to you. He says, I want to expand your point of view so that you see something. And what is that? He said that most people never have the benefit of seeing their vision because it's too narrow. They're only looking at the job. It's a little bit like a horse with blinkers. And many people never see the trap that a job gives them. And what is the trap? He says, if I paid you 25 cents, wouldn't that be good? Well, Robert's heart beat a little, and he said, well, it's okay, but 25 cents an hour at the moment would be big bucks to me. So the rich dad said, okay, I'll pay you $1 an hour. Now his heart was racing. My brain was screaming, take it. Okay. The rich dad said, I'll pay you $2 an hour. And then imagine $2 in 1956. He couldn't imagine earning that kind of money. He still wanted to say yes, but he was waiting for the lesson. What was the lesson? And finally, the ice cream in his hand had melted and was running down his hand. The ice cream stick was empty. Bear with me, I'm just admitting a few people in. Yes. And that's when the rich dad said, okay, I'll pay you $5 an hour. And suddenly there was silence. $5 an hour in 1956 for a 9-year-old. Something had changed. The offer was too big and had gotten ridiculous. Not many grown-ups in 1956 made more than $5 an hour. The temptation disappeared and a calm set in. Slowly, he turned to his left and looked at Mike. He looked back at me. The part of my soul that was weak and needy was silenced. The part of me that had no price took over. There was a calm and a certainty about money that entered my brain and soul. I knew Mike had gotten to that point as well. Good, said the rich dad softly. Most people have a price. And they have a price because human emotions called fear and greed take over. And then a pattern is set. So what pattern, he asked? The pattern is to go to work, pay the bills, get up, go to work, pay the bills. That's what I said, right? Go to work, come back, go to work, come back, go to work, come back. And that's all that you do. And while we are doing this, our salary is, I kid you not, our salary is like a drug that we cannot give up. And it's a little bit like me wanting to go and sail, but I'm not ready to let go of the shore. And you cannot sail at the shore. If I want to catch the next wave, I cannot be at the shore. I have to go out into the deep sea. And that's what we are scared to do because we've been taught to go to school, get a degree, get a job, and stay there. And that's when he says, the rich dad says, most people have a price and you have a pattern, but there is another way. But only few people find it. So Mike asked, what is the way? He says, that's what I hope you boys will find out when you work and study with me. So Mike said, give me a hint. And the rich dad says, the first step is telling the truth. He said, this is where does truth come in? There's not been no lies. And then he says, the rich dad asked him, how are you feeling? You don't have to tell anyone, just ask yourself. People in this path, the people who work for you, they don't speak the truth, he asked. Rich dad said, I doubt it. Instead, they feel the fear of not having money. And that's true for a lot of us, right? If tomorrow I knew that I'm going to lose my job, my fear is going to be the fear of the unknown because I haven't learned to make money. I haven't learned how to create work. I haven't learned how to be independent without depending on someone else to tell me how to make money. And therefore, the rich dad says, instead of telling the truth about how they feel, people react to their feelings and they hope that the money will soothe the fear. But that is not going to work. And that's when he says that we need to learn how to make money work for us. And he says, can you give me an example? And then the rich dad says, when a person says, I need a job, it's most likely an emotion doing the thinking, an emotion of fear of not having money, not knowing where the next salary or the next thing in your account is going to come from. So he says, I want to teach you to master the power of money. Do not be afraid of money. Be afraid of not knowing how to make money. And that's something that I'm learning as well at the age of 50 plus. I'm still learning how to let go of what we call the shore and make money and learn how to make money. And finally, Robert says, now it was slowly making sense because this is a 9-year-old boy, right? He says, now it was finally making sense. He did not want us to widen our views. He did not want us to see what people around him, like Mrs. Martin, who was working for the rich dad, was doing. He did not want just to look at his father, the poor dad. He used examples that sounded cruel, but Robert has never forgotten them. And his vision widened that day. We are all employees ultimately if we are working for someone. We just work, but at different levels. So it doesn't matter even if you are a CFO or a CEO of a company, you're still working for someone and you can still be fired by the board of directors. You need to know how to make money for yourself and know that you have more than one source of income. Thanks, Simran. I agree with what you say. The salary is like a drug which no one wants to give up. Don't be afraid of money. Be afraid of not learning how to make money. I love that, Simran. Any questions at this point? We've sort of reached the 2/3 mark of the hour. Before we move into the next chapter, are there any questions? Would anyone like to share? I see. I'm quite happy to call out names. Amita, Roshni, Silky Jain, Jaya, Kamlesh, Varsha, Jagruti. Welcome, Rakhi, Tabassum. Any questions?
Going very
Kalpana, very sorry, somebody wanted to speak.
Yes, I heard Amita first, so
Okay,
let Amita ask the question and
okay,
then I'll come
okay.
to you, Kamlesh.
no, there is no question. It is going good, I'm telling. Yeah,
Thank you so
I'm kind of
much.
high
Any
hopeful.
thoughts?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I have to go many more things. I have to hear from you.
True,
It's good.
true. Thank you
Yeah,
so
no
much.
questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Kamlesh, any thoughts or questions from your side?
Thoughts only, basically, and wonderfully you started covering this topic, and it is like, like you said, this particular kind of thing, it is never been taught in the school,
Exactly.
and since we are now, in millennium stage also, means our kids, we call it the millennium kids and all, but still, these particular things is never been taught. Only this typical this math, science, history, geography, only getting being told, but somewhere down the line has to be taught to the kids. And this,
Absolutely.
yeah, then only we can see our nation is progressing. Our kids are also, making a
Yes.
progress in their life, and not a
Agree.
stereotype the life they will live like.
I
Okay.
agree. Thank you
The
so
thought
much.
process, yeah, the thought process I just wanted to share here is, uh, when we track all our day-to-day expenses, no,
Mm.
maybe in one particular diary, because the new year has just started. Today is the last day of the month. One month is getting passed away from that.
Mm-hmm.
But if we keep aside one diary fully devoted for this only, like, my day's expenses, and from that also, many things can be sorted out. Many things can take control over. Like, if you are spending too much on some one particular thing, at the end of that particular month, or maybe the second month or third month, when you start analyzing what went and how it went, means previous month and all, it will give you lots of insights. Like, okay,
Very true.
yeah,
And
exactly,
journaling is a very good way to
yeah,
also,
exactly.
yeah, journaling is a good way. And the other thing, because we are talking about financial literacy and which is exactly the next chapter, why teach financial literacy? I remember something quite interesting that was done over one of the summer vacations in my son's school. They were taught to go to this website, and I'm not sure if it works in India, but there's a website called eToro, Etoro,
Okay.
where they were taught how to go in and invest. And I'm not saying everyone has to invest. That was just one way they were taught how important money is and how money can grow.
Hmm.
And eToro had, as a first time user, and this was probably created for students. I'm not sure that this is there for adults as well, but they were given, let's say, for example, 5,000 rupees as a signing bonus, but that this was like monopoly money, right? But
Uh,
they were asked to invest the money, see the money grow. So,
hmm.
but they were working with the stocks that were live. So
Wow,
what had been
wow.
created was this, there was obviously a dummy stock created, but it mapped exactly what was happening in the market. And they knew if they were making money or they were losing money. And based on that, quite a few students were truly intrigued, and they actually came to the parents, including my son, and said, I have saved up money for a long time. Can I start investing?
Hmm.
At that point, we could not invest in his name, so we had to invest in my husband's name because you have to be 18. But that was a great way for us to teach our children. Start small. You don't have to start with thousands, right? Start with 1,000
Yeah,
rupees or 5,000 rupees. And I think that's something that we need to teach our
yeah,
children.
exactly, exactly. These marketing plans are very much useful,
Um,
but the thing is how to invest it, and means, that literacy has to be there, because one of the financial expert that I met last week, he said, for India, it's a population of 147 crores, population of the country, and hardly 8% of the people are investing in
Investing.
mutual
Yeah,
funds and shares. Where is 8% and where is the population strength of
absolutely.
147
Yeah.
crores?
Yeah.
So, like
There's
that,
a lot of potential.
exactly.
And which is why, in fact, it's kind of a segue into the next chapter, which says, why teach financial literacy? But thanks so much, Kamlesh.
Oh, thank
And
you,
here,
Alpana.
here, Robert says, in 1990, my best friend Mike took over his father's empire, and in fact, doing a better job than his father did. We see each other once or twice a year on the golf course, and he and his wife are held wealthier than one can imagine. Rich Dad's empire is in great hands, and Mike is now grooming his son to take his place, as his dad had groomed us. In 1994, Robert says, I retired at the age of 47, and my wife Kim was 37. But what is interesting is retirement does not mean not working. That is the most important message today for me, is that retirement does not mean not working. To my wife and me, it just means barring unforeseen changes, we can work or not work, and our wealth grows automatically, and we stay ahead of inflation. That's a very, very important thing. I guess it means freedom. Freedom to do what you want to, when you want to, knowing that you've made. And again, as I said, it doesn't have to be investment. You could have started a few businesses which are now running on autopilot, or you've been able to sell a business to someone and made money from that, or you've set up managers to look after the business. You don't have to be involved in it day on day, right? He says, Mike chose to run the empire and I chose to retire. Whenever I speak to groups of people, they often ask what I would recommend or what they could do. How do you get started? Is there a good book that could be recommended? So he says, in 1923, a group of greatest elders and richest businessmen held a meeting. Amongst them were people like Charles Schwab, who was the head of the largest steel company. And he shares a few names. And he says, I doubt if anyone can say what really happened to these men. But if you look at the date in 1923, which was just before the 29 market crash and the Great Depression, I suspect that it had a great impact on the lives of these people. And the point is, today we live in times of greater and faster change. And the next 25 years, you will see ups and downs that are different than what these people faced. I'm concerned that too many people are focused on too much money and not their greatest wealth. Sorry, just admitting a few people in. And most people fail to realize that in life, it's not how much money you make, it's how much money you keep. It doesn't matter if I made $1 million. If I don't know how to take care of them, I'm going to lose it. So it's not important how much money you make. It's important how much I was able to keep and how much I was able to use to make more money for myself. And most people fail to realize that in life it's not, sorry, I just mentioned that it's not how much money you make, but how much money you keep. And we have always heard of, and this is important, right? We've heard stories of people who won lotteries. There was a windfall, they were poor, suddenly they became rich. But give them a year or two and they become poor again. One is, of course, when they have money, they have people around them who will come and ask for money. Two, they start spending it, not realizing that money, if not used properly, is going to be over. And usually people who win lotteries are known to lose their money very quickly and they become poor once again. And I agree, Roshni, financial literacy should be included in the curriculum for our children. It's not too late, and we need to be having conversations with our children. We need to be having conversations with educators to make sure that we teach our children about financial literacy. So he talks about a young boy, a basket player who a year ago had millions. Today, he claims his friend's attorney and accountant took his money, and now he works at a car wash at a minimum age. He's only 29. He was fired from the car wash because he refused to take off his championship ring as he was wiping off cars. But can you imagine if you're wearing a ring while wiping off cars, you're probably going to scratch the cars. But anyway, in 1997, Robert says, I know so many people who are becoming instant millionaires. It's the roaring 20s once more. And while I'm glad that people are getting richer and richer, I only caution that in the long run, it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. I agree with that, Simran. So when people ask, where do I get started, or tell me how to get quick rich, there is no quick rich unless you win a lottery. They often are greatly disappointed with my answer. I simply say to them that my rich dad said back to me when I was a kid, if you want to be rich, you have to be financially literate. If you're not financially literate, it doesn't matter how much money you make, you will own. So it's a little bit like pouring water into a pot which has a leak at the bottom. You will keep making the money, but you'll keep losing the money. You'll keep making the money, but you'll keep losing the money. So what's the point? And the idea has been drummed into his head every time he was together with his rich dad. And if you are going to build the Empire State Building, the first thing you need to do is to have a hole which is deep enough to be able to hold the Empire State Building. So what he's basically trying to say is, if you want to make a lot of money, step back a little bit and understand how are you going to keep the money. Our school system was created, God knows when, and still believes in homes with no foundations. So construction on a skyscraper begins, it goes up quickly, but instead we have a leaning tower of suburbia, which is basically saying that if we do not learn literacy, if you're building an empire state, you first have to go down deeper, make sure that the plinth is there before you start going up. If you want to make money, you have to make sure you learn how to invest. Yeah, Itoro, thanks Roshni for sharing that as well. So rule number one, you need to know the difference between an asset and liability. Buy assets. If you want to be rich, rule number one, you need to know what is an asset. It's the only rule. It sounds so simple, but most people have no idea how profound this rule is. But most people struggle financially because they don't know the difference between an asset and liability. Like I said, right? We think I bought a house, it's an asset, but it's not an asset, it's a liability. So rich people acquire assets. The poor and the middle class acquire liabilities, which they think are assets. So when Rich Dad explained this to his friend Mike and him, they thought he was kidding. And here we are, nearly teenagers, waiting for the secret to become rich. What's an asset? Mike asked. Don't worry right now, the rich dad said. Just let the idea sink in. If you can understand the simplicity, your life will have a plan and be financially easy. So Mike says, oh, so all I need to do is know what an asset is. And the rich dad said, yes, that's all there is. So as an adult, Robert says, I have difficulty explaining what assets and liabilities are, because adults are smart, but in most cases, the simplest of the idea escapes us very easily. They have been educated by other educated professionals like bankers, and the difficulty comes in asking adults to unlearn. It's true, right? It's easy to write on a blackboard which is completely blank. Simran, you were a teacher and you will probably know that, if you have a blackboard which is completely blank, it's easy to write. But if a lot of stuff is written on it and then you're trying to find space to write in it, it's very difficult. So unless you unlearn what you've learned, you're not going to be able to learn new ideas. So he says an intelligent adult often feels it is demeaning to pay attention to simple definitions. And he says, keep it simple and stupid. So he says, what caused the confusion? How could something so simple be so mixed up? We focus on the word literacy and not financial literacy, right? What defines something to be an asset or something to be a liability is not just the words. If you really want to be confused, look up the word asset and liability in a dictionary. As young boys, they were asked what defines an asset is not the words, but numbers. If you cannot read the numbers, you cannot tell an asset from a hole in the ground. In accounting, the rich dad would say it's not the numbers, but what the numbers are telling you. And this is a concept that I have heard from a lot of people who say it's not the data, right? You have a lot of companies which sell you data. There's no point in buying the data if you don't know how to find an insight from the data. And that's what differentiates an asset from a liability. So many people read but do not understand a lot. Just reading is comprehension. We have different abilities when it comes to reading. So how do you differentiate between an asset and liability? An accountant and a financial professional will not agree with your definition. What the rich dad said is, in a cash flow, right? And he's shared with us a diagram, but in what he says that there is an income statement where there's a profit and a loss, right? And on the balance sheet, if your asset is asking you to keep giving in money, then it's not an asset. Like I said, your house feels, oh wow, I've bought a house for, let's say, 1 crore, because if you're going to buy a house in a suburb in Bombay, it's going to be a 65 lakhs, 85 lakhs, 1 crore, depending on if it's a 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed. And you feel I have an asset of 1 crore, but actually it's not an asset. It's going to be a liability, as I mentioned, till we pay the EMIs. I'm coming to the end of the second chapter where we talk about assets and liabilities. If we understand the difference between this, our life will be so much simpler. And I'm not going to again go into the diagrams, but he also says that when we buy things like jewelry, it symbolizes the power of money. There is some degree to the truth in saying that, remember the golden rule: he who makes the gold makes the rules. And which is why a lot of people buy gold, because gold is always going to go up. Not the jewelry, but the coins or the bullions. And as we come to the top of the hour, he says, when it comes to houses, I point out that most people work all their lives paying for a home they never own. Because you pay taxes, it may not necessarily appreciate as much as you want. And as we come to the top of the hour, we literally have 3 minutes. So I'm going to ask, I'd rather open the floor and ask you if you have any questions or if you have any thoughts that you would like to share with us. And the next time that we meet, we are going to move into chapter number 3 onwards, which will then talk about, if I remember correctly, mind your own business, it says. But before we get into that, any questions in the last 2 minutes of our session? Thank you, Roshni and Simran. Thank you all. And I think the thought that we really need to take with us, after spending an hour with Robert Kiyosaki and his Rich Dad Poor Dad, is ask yourself, are you working for that salary, which I call a drug? And I am one of the people who is still attached to that drug. But the thought to take away today is, can we learn how to make sure that our money makes money for us? What can we do to ensure that we have passive sources of income and make sure that our money makes money for us? So Satvik, you can enroll for the next session by, you can save up the link for today because we use the same link. And there is no registration required, so to speak. It's every Wednesday, 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. India time, and it's the same link that you can use. And we've just started the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, so we will be continuing that for at least the next 2 to 3 weeks. Thank you, Raki. Thank you so much, and have a lovely evening, all of you. And we look forward to seeing you when one of us will be sharing about the book Rich Dad Poor Dad chapter 3 onwards. I like that, Tabassum. Consciously or subconsciously, we are used to the money drug, which is called a salary. Thank you, Jagruti. Thank you, Tabassum. Thank you, Satvik. I hope to see all of you next time when one of us will be sharing more insights about Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And on that note, have a lovely evening, good night, and have a lovely week. Thank you.
Thank you, Alf. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.